I'd like to open it up to questions. I'm just serving as moderator, but if people have a question, if you'd come up to the mic, and then we will refer that question to the panelists that would like to answer that question, maybe more than one.
When you look at the issue of equity and closing these gaps, and you look at education, you look at breaking down barriers, you look at the problems around devaluing women, where and at what place, and have you looked at this in your research, at the problem with domestic violence and intimate partner abuse in the society, both as a barrier, both as needing to make policy recommendations about it?
Do you want to go?
Sure. I have some to add to this discussion, and we'll certainly look to my fellow panelists to add more to this. Absolutely. Survivors of domestic violence face more challenges than many of their peers to achieving economic self-sufficiency. And one of the key barriers that was recently identified and connected with some of the policy work the Women's Foundation and several partners are advancing in this 2016 legislation, in the 2016 legislative session, pertains to access to child care subsidies. So in order to participate in the Colorado Child Care Assistance Program, there is a requirement that is more complex than this, but essentially says that a custodial parent must pursue child support payments from a non-custodial parent in order to maintain their eligibility to participate in the child care subsidy program. And as you can imagine, for survivors of domestic violence, this can be incredibly challenging to engage with their partner, former partner, their abuser, who certainly is not interested in engaging in that way. And recommendations have been made to simplify the process and eliminate some of those obstacles to access the child care subsidy for survivors of domestic violence. The Women's Foundation is pleased to support this measure, and we are grateful to a number of partners who are working so hard to advance this legislation. And we look forward to doing everything we can to help the measure move forward. And we'd also appreciate your support for this measure as well.
Yeah, Pam, I think it's an excellent point, and I think it's a point that is borne out in the economic research as well, that women's vulnerability to this violence is very intimately connected to this devaluing, and we have an economic system that doesn't support and protect women. And so I guess I would sort of amend my list a little bit too, to take that into account in terms of what a really a proper type of support would be for caregivers of kids to be able to protect individual women from the vulnerability of domestic violence. So I thank you for raising that point.
I would add that at our program, between 70 and 80% of the women we serve are victims of domestic violence. And so in addition to issues with CCAP, there can be issues with other public assistance. There can be issues with the court system that impact a woman's ability to work. If her abuser is taking her to court every 3 weeks, she may lose her job, or she may not be able to engage in school fully. And then the trauma itself and the mental health impacts it has are significant. So maybe things seem okay and it's time to go to school, and you get on campus at CSU and all of a sudden you're triggered and your post-traumatic stress kicks in. And now you don't feel comfortable sitting in class and you can't get out of bed in the morning. So there are lots of complications that come with having that abusive background, for sure.
Okay, another question? In essence, as a female economist, she is asking us how different kinds of supports, wages may look fairly similar or more similar in the 20s. They seem to have more of a gap, increasing in their 30s and 40s. And what would you do to maybe eliminate that gap, or to think of what kinds of supports would be helpful? I hope I framed that sufficiently.
Do you
Alex,
mind if
it looks like you want to answer.
Yeah, I do. I mean, that's exactly right. when you look at the gender wage gap, women's wages may even be slightly higher than men's wages in the early stages of their lives. It is in the childbearing years that this is when the gap opens up, and it never closes. And you know, we've talked a lot about childcare, but elder care plays a role in this as well. And very often when women are getting to the age where, you know, maybe their children aren't as young, but they're in school, they have elderly parents they need to take care of as well. And again, what we see from the research is that men tend to provide financial support for elderly parents, whereas women tend to provide more time in terms of caring for elderly parents. So again, to me, this is the crux of the matter. This is where the inequity comes from, and it really comes from that caring responsibility, and it is incongruous, inconsistent with the way that we do work. Whoever does that gets penalized, and because it is disproportionately women get penalized. And that's where I don't see really any solution to this problem until we face that basic reality. And I do think that the rhetoric around this is childcare is so important. Yeah, but we don't want to pay for it, we don't want to support it. And when you're earning $10,000 a year, you do not have the capacity to pay for childcare. So if we could just recognize that this is important work that is done by, you know, a lot of different people and support it regardless of whether you earn $10,000 or $50,000 or whatever, we could, I think, really, you know, take on the issue. But this gender pay gap, we have made progress, but we've made progress largely because the labor market for men has totally deteriorated, and so their earnings are falling more rapidly than women's earnings. And I guess I'm an advocate for education. Don't get me wrong, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. But you know, when you see the gap at every educational level, there is something more systemic in this. I mean, for self-sufficiency, from a self-sufficiency perspective, more education is good, but you still haven't eliminated the gap, you haven't eliminated the bias, you haven't eliminated the penalty, not only in money, but in aggravation and worry and health and time and all of these things that prevent somebody from really going into the labor market and earning a wage and taking care of other people. I think that's the bottom line. I don't know.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. I think I absolutely agree that childcare, which I'm sure is going to be highlighted in the Women's Foundation new report. Colorado is one of the most expensive states for center-based childcare, and we have a program, a state program, the Child Care Assistance Program, that does provide some child care assistance to low-income parents, but it serves a fraction of the people who need it, less than 20%. So this is an issue that touches people across the income spectrum. Sure, it's a larger barrier for people at the lower end of the income spectrum, but even middle income, people at the median, when you have a family, 2 wage earners, and you're looking at paying child support for 1 or 2 kids for full time, sometimes it just doesn't make economic sense for usually the woman to keep working, and it's more cost effective to stay home with the kids until they can start preschool. And so I absolutely agree. This is something that we need to have a discussion about, investing more resources in this and seeing how that it is important to our families, our communities, and the economy as a whole. So thank you for your question.
Nancy,
I can't help but add as moderator, but on that one, it's important to note that if women do step out by choice or because of economic self-sufficiency, they shouldn't be penalized when they step back in. And I think that's a huge issue for some of the things that the earlier question around what happens when that gap gets larger when you're in your 30s or 40s. Well, if we had some mechanism of how we counted for time when someone steps out, and that does allow for choice. but when they come back in, they would not be penalized by wages. So I'm sorry I left my role, but I felt a need to say that. Okay, other questions?
I'm a firm believer in STEM education and STEM careers. I think I heard a couple of times tonight that one of the potential solutions is to encourage more women to go into STEM education and careers. Do you have the numbers on the statistics of the difference in the wage gap for women who are in STEM careers versus women who aren't? And what are the differences? Is the difference enough to make that difference?
Okay, anybody?
Well, let me just pull out my folder here. Earlier today, I was waiting my turn to testify in a House Education Committee hearing in support of 2 STEM education-related measures. So when I find the right page, I can quote some of those stats for you. I will say that the gender wage gap is proven to be narrower for women working in STEM fields, and the earning potential for women in STEM fields versus non-STEM fields tends to have about a $20,000 a year advantage. So for women working here in Colorado, in the Denver metropolitan area and Colorado Springs metropolitan area are 2 of the areas I can recall on memory. The difference for earnings at every level of education, so those that do not require a bachelor's degree, an associate's or less, the earnings differential in STEM careers was about $20,000. And moving into higher levels of education, that differential remains about as large in communities across Colorado. So there is certainly a very worthwhile wage benefit for women pursuing careers in STEM. And I think it's also worth noting that here in Colorado, there are growing job opportunities in the STEM fields. The tech sector is one of the fastest growing across the nation, and it's growing even at a higher rate here in Colorado. And there are more STEM entry-level job opportunities here in Colorado than in 48 other states. So there are tremendous opportunities for women to advance their education through a certificate program, through an associate's degree, perhaps some hands-on training to be prepared for jobs in advanced manufacturing that certainly require technical skills, or to pursue a bachelor's degree or higher. And at every level, there are tremendous job opportunities in growing fields here in Colorado. And I think it's also important to note that there are also employers here in Colorado committed to improving gender equity in STEM. The Women's Foundation has the good fortune of being able to work with a number of STEM employers who really do understand the value for having more women in their workforce, for working hard to achieve gender equity. They understand that there is a solid business case that companies that have more women in their workforce and are able to recruit and retain more women as they advance into positions of leadership especially, that the financial bottom line for those companies is improved, that their teams are more creative and have better abilities to solve problems than individuals in teams that are not as diverse, and certainly with more diverse teams in comparison with the highest IQ individuals that can be offered as competition. The diverse teams that include gender equity are able to really tackle problems more effectively. And in companies that have made this commitment to creating opportunities for women to advance in these STEM careers, there is solid research that shows that turnover costs are reduced, that employees are more satisfied and more committed to the work. So not only is there an individual benefit for women pursuing STEM fields, Colorado companies have a bottom line motivation to ensure that they're doing everything they can to improve opportunities for women to enter and remain in these fields. And we're very excited that some exciting progress is being made in terms of increasing commitment to gender equity in STEM. And this is another part of the work we'd really invite you to share as broadly and widely as you can, so that those who have an opportunity to benefit by engaging more women in their own STEM workforce are enlightened to the opportunities to improve their business by doing so.
Alex?
I'm probably not quite as optimistic, and I'm sorry. I'm gonna say, I think a lot of women are potentially interested, but there are a lot of significant barriers to women's participation in STEM occupations. And the research on this is pretty clear as well. If you look at academia, we have a real intransigence when it comes to expanding women faculty in the STEM disciplines. I mean, we just, our standing committee on the status of women faculty just submitted an NSF advance grant to try to improve the position for women STEM faculty here at CSU. And we've done extensive research on this. And, you know, if you've been reading in the paper lately too, you see lots of examples of sexual harassment of women in these areas. It's not a hospitable environment for women in a lot of respects. And I think I'm not going to, you know, go back to my old soapbox here. But again, the women face not only sort of a devaluing of what they do in those occupations, but often a hostile environment too. So we have to really think more broadly about what it means to encourage women to go into STEM fields, because the other thing is you can get through high school, you can go to college, and then you get into a job and you're in a really horrible situation. And what do you have? You have a lot of women who leave those occupations, they've invested a lot in education, and then they go into other lower paying jobs because they really can't stand it in that environment. So the culture and the climate within STEM has to change significantly to really, I think, make it a hospitable place for more girls and women to go into.
Thank you. I know I saw another hand up back there. Yes.
I want to know what work is being done to get this information to HR departments. Because, you know, a lot of us attend meetings a lot, and it's not the safest route for us to send it alone. So I was just wondering what was going on that front.
From our standpoint, it's about finding those companies that Louise mentioned that are excited about bringing diversity in, and then going in with a partnership and talking about, hey, we have this skilled workforce that we want to bring to you. You have a need. How do we work together around this issue? And it's almost a behind the scenes conversation first about what we do and what you do. And I think it's not something that we're going to tackle by bringing in a bunch of HR managers into a room and telling them what they need to do. It really needs to be that conversation, introducing the topic in a way that's palatable, maybe not quite with all the data, but with stories about what's happening in your community right now and how you can invest in your community and how you can partner with organizations who are already doing the work to forward that work. Because I do think it's a challenging conversation to have, and as Alex pointed out, you know, not everyone's super excited to bring a bunch of women onto the floor. So we've got to approach it carefully, and we have to have a few early wins with these initiatives. We can't just all of a sudden flood one company or one sector. We've got to handle it carefully, I think, and strategically.
Louise, do you want to share the new resource coming? I'm asking Louise if she'd like to share some information about a new resource that would actually apply to employers.
Right. Nancy, thank you for the opportunity to follow up on the good recommendations Stephanie made. The Women's Foundation is working closely with some of those STEM employers I mentioned a moment ago. to address some of the specific challenges that Alex just noted around the hostile work environment in many cases that pushes women out of STEM careers. We have companies coming to the table with the Women's Foundation as a partner who recognize the potential value in improving gender equity in their workforce. They know that this is something that is good for their companies to do, and they're coming to the table to learn from each other and alongside with the Women's Foundation about how to make those changes that are necessary to ensure that as women enter STEM careers, they are supported in remaining in them and being successful over the long term. And the natural question is, okay, we want to do this. How? And we are currently working to develop a robust resource site that these employers can use to tap into case studies of companies that have invested in these efforts and have had great success, to learn from their experiences, to learn about how they tackled challenges along the way, to share with them training programs and tools for measuring the status quo and then the progress that they make to improve upon it within their own company. And we are working hard to ensure that the employers who are already invested in the effort to improve gender equity have the resources to do that effectively, and that we are learning from this group's experience so that they can then be examples and leaders among the sector as a whole to lead this change in other companies as well.
I would like this to be our last question.
Sure. It's
Okay.
a follow-up questions about the STEM questions as well, and I particularly want to hear from Stephanie on that. In terms of the practice, so you're encouraging those women into STEM education, like get additional education so they can take on STEM jobs. How successful in practice you are? Because in academic setting, we've been seeing, like in computer sciences, in engineering, women are under 20% in the past 2 decades. Nothing changed. People were trying so hard, nothing changed. So I was curious, when you were doing your work there, how does that change the outlook?
That's a great question, and I think we're learning as we go. But every year we have more and more participants choosing STEM careers, and part of it is that at our organization, all of the career counselors are social workers. And often we want to emulate the people in our lives who are helping make a difference. So we want to be social workers, or we have a teacher that stands out. So introducing our participants to women in these careers and helping them develop a relationship, doing a job shadow so they can see what it's like to go and spend a day at HP or Intel, and what does it feel like to be in that male-oriented career? Can they hack that? Helping them think about what skills and talents they have, and how maybe if you have a computer science degree, you could still work in a social service capacity, and you could still be in a helping profession. Or we have right now someone who's graduated last year with her environmental engineering degree because she feels passionate about the environment. And if we can pair that passion with a STEM degree, she's much more marketable and can earn more. So a lot of it is the skill of the advisor to take these social, artistic, conventional assessment scores and tie them to STEM scores, but then providing those real life, everyday examples of a mom who's working in that career, and bring it down to earth, really. Because when I think of a computer engineer or a software engineer, I'm thinking of somebody I probably can't even have a conversation with, but that's not true. And I think it's slow going in some of those careers, but yeah.
Well, in respect for your time, I think we need to close the question and answers. I believe Caridad would like to come up and say a few words, or no? She's being very modest. As she's coming up in taking my hat off again as moderator, I think we can all do better jobs of identifying career pathways into the STEM careers, and some of those pathways may not always be just a professional career, but we could look at technical careers and ways to start people. Project Self-Sufficiency, by the way, I read their grant last year, so she doesn't know that. I read their grant last year, and they are doing a fabulous job of introducing women into the healthcare professions that have a very livable wage. And that's one good example in a broad definition of STEM of the kinds of things we can do if we look at career pathways. So again, I deviated.
Thanks, Nan.
So I'd like to thank all of you for staying. I know it's late. And also our panelists who have provided us with some really interesting insights, the data. This is part of the outreach that the Center for Women's Studies and Gender Research does and is committed to for the state of Colorado, for Northern Colorado, and especially for this area, for the Fort Collins area. You'll be hearing more about us and the work that we're going to pursue in relationship to some of the recommendations. We hope to see you again at other events and or engage with other projects as we move forward. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you for your presence tonight and for your questions.